Hello again, everybody. Welcome back. Professor Champy here again. I apologize for getting these videos out pretty late. It was later than I planned. I had a family thing this weekend, and going forward, I'm going to try to have them up sooner, like definitely more of them on Monday and Tuesday. I want to try to get everything kind of done by then. So I'll try to stick to that schedule more so in the future. So sorry about that. But I want to talk in this video about should writers use their own English, the essay that we read by Vershawn Young. I also read through all of your discussion posts. I printed them out, I read them, I underlined them. You can't really see. But I'm going to try to respond to some of the things that you guys said and incorporate that and, try to make it as much of a discussion as we can. I think that's what I'm going to try to do with these discussion boards. I'm going to try to do a video where I read some of what people posted and respond to it and talk about it that way. All right, so let's get into this essay. I tried to keep a tally of how many people liked the writing style versus how many people didn't. I think probably around 80% of people either like really liked it or were fine with it, and then there was maybe like another 15 to 20% of people who either were annoyed by it or thought it was too confusing or just didn't appreciate it. So it seems like people mostly liked it, and I think that makes sense to me. A lot of you guys, one thing that was interesting, a lot of people were saying that they thought the way that he writes is more like how teenagers talk, or they said that they thought teenagers might like this writing style better. Um, and I thought that was interesting. I never really considered it that way before. But I guess that makes sense. But I think it's because kind of the way that old people talk is what becomes the standard, you know? So when he's speaking so it's like teenagers still have, and when we're younger, I think we still have more of a connection to slang, but also more of a willingness to like express ourselves. We're not as ground down by the system yet to where we just are only going to talk in the very standard way. So I thought that was interesting that you guys were connecting it to teenagers. But okay, so to get into this, I want to start by just reading what I think is his thesis from the essay. So this is on the second page of the essay, page 111, kind of towards the middle. He says at the end of one of his paragraphs here, and that's my exact argument, that we all should know everybody's dialect, at least as many as we can, and be open to the mix of them in oral and written communication. So I just want to pause on that for a second because I think it's important to understand what his argument really is here. He's not saying that everyone needs to talk like him or something like that, or that you should be writing in the dialect that he's using here. He's more, just asking us to be open to different dialects being mixed and put together. Another thing he's not saying is he's not saying that standard English should be abolished or that no one should ever write that way. There are certain sentences in here that single sentences that you could pick out and they're in standard English. There are some sentences here where he doesn't really use any dialect, but that's because his point is about mixing them, right? That's why he uses the term code meshing, taking dialect, standard English, different forms of dialect. Maybe a lot of you guys were talking about like technology, the different ways that language changes with technology, like texting, speak, or the way we write on social media, and combining all of these things is what he's saying. Not just saying one of them is any better than any other. So I really appreciate that. I think what he's trying to do, to a large extent, is kind of get rid of the hierarchy. Where if standard English is number one, and then like whatever, or some dialect is two, a different one's three, he wants to kind of even the playing field and be like, well, they're all just kind of dialects, including standard English. I think that gets interesting. So that's what he's really arguing here. And of course, as you guys all explained really nicely, I should say I thought your discussion posts were excellent. I really enjoyed them. I thought that they were great. I was highlighting stuff all over, underlining things, making stars. So that was perfect with the discussion post. That's exactly what I want to see from you guys with those. It doesn't have to be anything big or involved or formal. I just want to know your thoughts, just like pretend you got called on in class when we were doing those questions. And, you can just kind of go off the top of your head with whatever comes to mind with those questions. So I thought it was really excellent the way you guys had it. I really enjoyed it. Okay, so I wanted to read here. This is also page 111. He talks here about this. He uses this phrase, standard language ideology. So he says here, standard language ideology is the belief that there is one set of dominant rules that all stem from a single dominant discourse, like standard English, that all writers and speakers of English must conform to in order to communicate effectively. So that's Fish's position, right? This term, standard language ideology. Ideology is a weird word for him to use here, but I think he uses it because what he's describing is the belief in these things. And when he talks about it that way, it makes me think about how, like, okay, we have these rules for grammar, right? It's you, it's spelled Y-O-U instead of the letter U, you know, that's the correct form. Well, you know, why? Where did that come from? Who decided? Who decided the comma goes there, you know? Who decided that it's the FOR and not FO is acceptable? I think if we follow these questions far enough, we realize that, you know, these rules were not handed down from above. You know, it wasn't, someone didn't go up the mountain and then come down with the tablets in stone that said, like, you know, you have to put a comma after a conjunctive clause, or something like that. These were rules were not given us to us by God. So if that's not the case, then where do they come from? If you look at the history of like how language developed, and you know, humans have been using language and even writing language for thousands of years. And even the idea that there's a standard, like people will say, oh, a dictionary or something like that, you know, even though a dictionary, it's not really grammar, it's more words, but it has correct spelling at least, you know. The oldest dictionaries are like a few hundred years old, you know. I think the 1700s, really, maybe the mid 1700s, is where you see people start really trying to make actual dictionaries. Because obviously, before you have like the printing press or something, it's unimaginable that there would be a dictionary. Um, and then I think making dictionaries, it kind of came about in the same time. Like, I don't know if you guys maybe have taken like science classes or something. It was kind of around the same time that they were making like systems for all of this stuff, like where they were trying to catalog all the different kinds of plants, or when they were trying to, yeah, catalog different things about like the universe and stuff. So it was during like the same time that the first dictionaries were made. So what that means, I think, is that even the idea that there should be a standard English is really only a few hundred years old, which is nothing compared to how long humans have been using language, you know? So these things are always a historical process. This is something, it's a human made thing, it's a human construct, you know? So I think that we should immediately view it as not something that is unquestionable or something that we have to just accept without thinking about it, because it was just made by other humans. And like, you know, well, why do they know better than us? We're also humans. And it's kind of like any standard, you know, like if you start thinking about any standard, whether it's you know, just to give an example, something like beauty, you know, like what's considered attractive at a certain time period, it obviously changes over the course of history. If you look back at you know, like the Middle Ages or something. It's people putting white powder on their faces, and women wearing those dresses that are all the way out here, you know, and they have 15 layers of clothes, and men are wearing like these weird like frilly jackets and like pointy shoes and stuff. And like these things just change over time. Standards are not eternal. Even something like morality, you know, a lot of the things that like the ancient Greeks thought were moral, we don't think are moral. A lot of the things that we think are moral, they didn't. So the standards are always kind of evolving, they're always changing. It's worth questioning them. I'm not saying that we should get rid of all morality standards necessarily, but it's worth at least questioning them and not accepting them as just God-given things that we have to follow. So those are a few good points that I wanted to get to there. Okay, here's just another quote, and I think this just is a really good quote that kind of describes his position again, just to give us more understanding. This is on page 112. He says, see, people be more plurilingual than we want to recognize. What we need to do is enlarge our perspective about what good writing is, how good writing can look at work, at home, and at school. I love this phrasing of what we need to do is enlarge our perspective about what good writing is. And I would say that that's basically the reason I wanted you guys to read this essay, you know, is because I think when we take an English class, basically what we expect to do is be asked to like follow grammar rules, check off the when we write an essay, the way we approach it is to check off the boxes on the rubric, you know, a thesis, transition words, a conclusion paragraph, all this, and like yeah, like we do need some of those things, but I think the whole approach of like, I think what's kind of happened is that they've tried to turn English into like math or something, you know, where you can just like, oh, if you put this here and put this here, and that now you get the right answer, like as if it's some kind of formula or equation. It's just not, that's just not the kind of thing that it is. there's so much gray area when it comes to writing. It doesn't lend itself easily to like standardized tests, you know? So I think a lot of the ways that we've been forced to approach it by the educational system was informed by these kind of flawed views about writing and what it is. So I think I'm hoping with this class that we can enlarge our perspective in this kind of way. I want to address some of the reasons that people maybe didn't like the essay, or some of the things that people disagreed with Fish on, or sorry, with Vershawn Young on. And some of the ways that people maybe agreed with Fish. So one thing that I was reading some people saying was, just that it was that it could be hard to understand. That if we become accepting of dialects in like an academic essay, because Fish, why do I keep doing that? Because Vershawn Young believes this all the way, right? Like he's writing an academic essay. I don't know if you guys noticed. But the article, the essay that you read, it's published in the International Journal of Composition Studies. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with journals as a thing, but it's when professors write their essays and get them published, they go in journals. So it's at the highest level of academic writing, essentially. So he's doing that thing right now, obviously, with what he's saying. Okay, so here's a couple of things that I wanted to address. I'm reading from someone's post. I didn't write down the names of whose post it was. But I'm reading from someone's post here that they said, that if you speak in dialect, that only a handful of people will understand you. This idea that, oh well, people just won't understand it if you're using dialect. And I don't know. I wonder how true that really is. Is it like, if for the people who found this essay confusing, or some people were saying like they had to go back and read parts of it over again or something like that, was it because it's just like things we don't know because we just don't understand, or was it because like we're not expecting it or we're not used to it? Because like part of reading is that we're kind of used to like the forms of the words and what they look like, and like that helps us like read faster, just with like the way our eyes and our brains like do reading. So if it's shortened or if it looks different, like that can trip us up a little bit. But I wonder if we read things like this more often, would we still have that problem? Is it that we don't know the words, or that we're confused by that, or just that we weren't expecting this? You're also taking a college English class, so maybe you were expecting that I would give you something very proper, proper, right? We're gonna talk a lot about that word in a little bit. But yeah, then you get this. So I wonder how much of it is that. Some other things I would say about this idea that it's hard to understand dialects. Vershawn Young says this in there, but I think we all speak more dialects than you might realize. Um, Obviously, the first ones that come to mind might be like, if you have family members who speak a different language, or if you grew up around people who speak Spanish, or some other language or something like that. Those are obviously dialects that come with those kinds of things. But I would go even further and say that like there's a certain dialect for people who play video games. If I start talking about, RPGs and NPCs and and stuff like that, that's like, if you don't play video games, you probably don't know what those things mean, maybe, or maybe it's the internet, whatever. I think there's like a certain dialect, a certain set of words, a certain way of using language that is unique to these different areas. Same thing with sports. If I start talking about layups and jump shots and true shooting percentage and going to the charity strike, and these things, those are all basketball terms, right? I always love all the baseball ones. There's a lot of great terms for baseball, but whatever. I think each of these kind of sections in our lives almost has a different dialect. Like if you're talking to your friends who play video games, there's certain things you can say and you know that they'll get it. Um, so I think we all move from one dialect to another more often than we might realize. Another thing on this point of how hard is it to really understand it. What would you guys say is like the best selling, or I guess you don't even sell it, the most streaming music right now? I used to say who sells the most albums, but we don't do that. Whose songs like stream the most right now? I don't know the answer to this. I'm not in touch with common music. I'm gonna guess it's somebody like, I don't know, Drake or Kanye West, or I don't know, somebody like that, right? Whoever it is, do they use standard English? Whoever the top selling musician is, do they use standard English? I don't think so. I just don't think they do. So the fact that so many people listen to this stuff, even though it's not standard English, that tells me, I think, that people kind of understand it. Like I know music's not all about the lyrics; it's the beat and many other things. but I feel like we also want to connect with the lyrics at least a little bit, or that's how we learn new words in a lot of way. Like I definitely learned a lot of words from listening to rap music that I didn't know. A lot of the terms about like guns and stuff I definitely learned from rap music. Uh, so I think that shows that kind of openness, and how in our normal lives we are open to new dialects. We learn the word. I've had that experience with students. There's a few slang words I can remember learning from students. The word bet as like an affirmation, like oh bet or like that. I learned that from a student one time. I was like telling the students like, oh okay, here's your homework for tonight. Like read this and like answer these questions. And one of the kids goes, all right, bet. And I was like, what? I was like, are we talking gambling? Because I was mentioning stuff about sports and betting. I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, no, it's like, yeah, bet, like I got you. And I was like, oh, all right, there we go. And now I know. So I think that's all that Vershawn Young was really asking for us. The same thing happened to me with the word geeked. To be geeked about something. That was another one I learned from students. So I think that's fine, and I think that's good, and I think we can embrace it. And if we don't understand, it's like, usually you can use context clues to figure that out. Like I'm sure you guys remember that phrase, context clues being yelled at you while you were in high school and stuff. Use the context clues. So how come people can't do that now? How come we had to do it? So here's how it goes, right? When we're learning standard English, we've got to use context clues to figure it out. Oh, but then when other people are presented with dialect, we can't ask them to do that. That's too much. So I think the thing here, though, when we're talking about other people understanding when it comes to language, there's a couple of words that he gives us that I think are helpful. I'm looking again on page 112. So the two words, one of them is teaching writing prescriptively versus descriptively. So prescriptively is what Fish is doing. It's prescriptive. If we're teaching it in a prescriptive way, that means we have the rules, right? We determine what the rules are, and then we teach them from everyone. It's a kind of top-down approach where the rules are there, and then you make everyone follow them. Teaching writing descriptively is what Vershawn Young believes, which is kind of starting with how people actually talk, and then building the rules off of that. It's more like observing how people talk and just kind of like documenting that and being like, okay, this is how it is, I guess. This is what people are doing. I guess that's what it is now. And like, I think we know that that's kind of always how it works. Like, if you think of the thing of, how new words get added to the dictionary. Like, I think the phenomenon of new words getting added to the dictionary, everyone loves it, right? Because they're like, oh, wow, now it's an official word. And I think we know how silly it is because it'll be a word that's been in use for like 10 years. Oh, it's in the dictionary now. It's like, okay, so it wasn't okay to use before, but now it is because you put it in the dictionary. So we know these things change over time. Like, I remember when like Google as like a verb, like to Google something was added to the dictionary. So that stuff, so we always kind of do it anyway. But yeah, there's the descriptive approach versus the prescriptive approach. So just on that idea, Vershawn Young writes here, he says on page 112, teaching speaking and writing prescriptively as Fish want force people into patterns of language that ain't natural or easy to understand. A whole lot of folk could be writing and speaking real smart if Fish and others stop using one prescriptive foot-long ruler to measure the language of peeps who use a yardstick when they communicate. So yeah, he's basically saying the standard that you're trying to use is artificial, it's fake, it's made up, and you're imposing it on these people who might actually have really valuable and intelligent things to say if you just didn't hold them to this weird standard. If you kind of accepted how people like show up, how they bring it to you, and just try to meet them where they are, and that kind of thing. Just a couple other things that I really liked from this page of the essay. He uses a term here. Somebody quoted this in their post, I remember. He says, the narrow prescriptive lens be messing readers and writers all the way up because we all been taught to respect the dominant way to write, even if we don't, can't, or won't ever write that one way ourselves. That be hegemony, internalized oppression, linguistic self-hate. I love that phrase, linguistic self-hate. Linguistic, like language, like hating our own language is basically what he's saying. And that's as cheesy as I feel like I sound now. I feel like that's what the educational system has taught us. I feel like that's what English classes have taught us. Is that the way that the thoughts in our head, the language, because we have language going in our head all day long, right? Is that the language in your head, your language that colors your life and your experience? It sucks. Actually, it's not good enough. And that's just wrong. Like just from like a human kind of moral perspective for me, it's like that's just wrong to do. Um, but yeah, the linguistic self-hate. I think that's a really useful way of thinking about this. Another phrase that he uses later on, um, talking about grammar rules. He says, what makes something understandable is the intention of the speaker, not rules from the grammar policeman. So I appreciate that the grammar policeman, another common phrase, a grammar Nazi, that whole thing. I think that though, that sounds extreme, but I think that taps into the idea that like, yeah, there's something kind of like almost authoritarian about this need to control the language of people to say, oh no, well you actually spelled this wrong. That's the wrong kind of there. You put the comma wrong, and that yeah, it's a very kind of strange impulse. So I like that he calls it the grammar policeman as well. Oh, okay. Here's another big thing that people mentioned um, that I want to address. I think maybe the same post I was reading from before. They said I agree with Young, but not fully, because I understand having your own dialect is comfortable. But let's say you go to a job interview or have a special dinner, no one will take you seriously. A lot of people made this point. I'm just reading from one post, but a lot of people made this point that well, it might be not professional in all situations to speak in dialect. Um, People might not take you seriously if you look into if you speak in dialect. Maybe this means. And okay, there's two things here, right? Number one is like the world that we live in. The practical world. Like if I was going to a job interview tomorrow, I would try to speak in standard English mostly. I think we all know if we're going to a job interview, we want to talk in that like formal way. That's the world that we live in. I think a separate question is like, is that how it should be? And just because that's how it is, I don't think that means we shouldn't consider what it should be, because these things do change. These things can change. And that's something else I want to say. So the word professional, proper, what's considered professional changes over time. Vershawn Young, he gives the example. I think he talks about hairstyles, right? He talks about like braids or like natural hair as something that used to be like just viewed as totally unprofessional. And I think, maybe that still exists a little bit. I think I actually saw some states pass laws about this recently that like it's, part of the law that you can't like discriminate against someone based on their hairstyle when it comes to work. But I think I think that's changed a lot. From what it was in like the 80s or whatever. I think it's much more acceptable now, even if there are still some people who suck about it or whatever. So it changes is the point. So I think somebody else, I wish I had more time to be able to find all of your posts because I thought they were really good and I want to read your words. But I think someone also mentioned tattoos. And I think that was another great point. Same thing. Back in the 80s, it was you have like a tattoo. It's like, oh, you don't need a job. That's good, I guess. Like, oh, there's no way you're ever getting a job with that. And now tattoos are way more acceptable. Like my sister has a tattoo, and she is like a salesperson who like gets paid a lot of money. I know professors who have tattoos. So again, just like all of these other standards, the standard of what is professional changes over time. So for that reason, I think we should consider, well, what should this be considered unprofessional? Is that how it ought to be? Is that how it should be? Um, I think that's a different question. Another thing to get into: who decides what's considered professional? Again, it wasn't handed down to us from God. So where did we get this from? Who decides? Humans over time through a historical process for sure. But it's like it also just so happens that like the things that a certain group do are the ones that then become professional. For instance, the idea that like what's professional? Oh, I like the shirt with the collar and like a suit and like a jacket and stuff. I always remember seeing whenever I see pictures of kind of like radical world leaders or like communist world leaders from the 20th century. They never wear suits and ties. And like Fidel Castro or someone's always wearing like a military, or even now when you see like Kim Jong Un or something, like he never wears a suit and tie really. And I think there's something there where for those people they saw a suit and tie as being like a Western standard, that they were like trying to go against. Um, so I think it just shows where these ideas of professionalism come to us from. Here's another point on this: accents. I think somebody mentioned like Southern accents, like they were like, oh well, people down south like they kind of have an accent, and they look at us up north, and they're like, oh, what's wrong with your accent? And I thought that was a really good point. How these things are, it's kind of relative in a way, depending on where you're from, how you grew up, how the people talk to you you're raised around. But here's another thing. I think if we consider which accents are like always considered unprofessional and which accents can be professional, I think we can learn something. So like for instance, if you have like an English accent, let's say like a London type accent, like like the way like the Beatles talked or something. I don't know. Maybe that's a bad example, but if you like a London accent, like a fancy British accent, is that unprofessional? Even if they came to New York, is that unprofessional? I don't know. It's different. People, I don't think it's like, oh, you're definitely not getting the job now because you talk that way. I think it's just viewed as like, oh, kind of different. If people even like it sometimes. But when you break down that accent, it's not just the pronouncing words differently. They have different words for things. Like they might say loo for bathroom or lorry for a truck. There's all kinds of different words. Biscuits for cookies or whatever. Like there's all kinds of differences there. But yeah, I don't think that one gets considered unprofessional, really. Although, if you guys know what like a Cockney accent was, I can't do any accents. If I could, I might. I don't know. Maybe that'd be bad, actually. If it's good, I can't do them, I guess. But if you know like a Cockney accent, it's considered kind of like a lower class British accent. That one I think does get viewed as unprofessional. So it's like, oh, the one that rich people speak, professional. The one poor people speak, oh, unprofessional. I think similarly, if you think of like a Southern accent, like a Southern, again, like aristocrat kind of fancy Southern gentleman, Southern belle kind of situation, does that get considered unprofessional? Even if they move to New York, it'd be like, oh, you'll never get a job in New York if you have that kind of Southern accent. I don't think so. I think it's kind of fine. I think people like it sometimes even. But I think Vershawn Young mentioned like if you speak like Appalachian, I think is the word he used. If you speak more of like a hillbilly type Southern accent, okay, well then that one might actually you probably won't get the job then, right? And then obviously, if we start talking about like, oh, if you have a Spanish accent, if you talk the way Vershawn Young does, it's like you can tell me, oh, those are the professional, those it's just more professional. But then when we look at it, it's like, oh, the ones that are like specifically rich, white people mostly, those are the ones that are professional. But if you're poor, or Spanish accent or like person of color, really with any kind of accent that's associated with any like other culture or ethnicity, unprofessional now. Or like a French accent. Is that one going to be unprofessional? So I don't know. I do think there's something, and of course he makes this point when kind of connecting this to race, which he says that right from the beginning that he thinks that the kind of language discrimination is also a sort of racial discrimination. And I think that when we look at the accents that get accepted, the ones that don't, I think that kind of shows us something about it. And getting to the last thing I wanted to deal with here, the status quo kind of point, I think that affects it in one way. Another way I see the status quo point, which the status quo, if you don't know that term, it's just kind of like how things are now. It's kind of like in terms of like the organization of society, like politically, economically, like who's on top, who's on the bottom, that kind of stuff. Like I was trying to talk about it. Um, so I think somebody said this in one of their posts, but if you're raised somewhere where everyone around you speaks standard English, like for instance, if your parents are like have the rich British accent or something or whatever, but like well, you get whatever accent you grow up with, basically. So if you grow up in a place where your family, your parents just so happen to speak standard English, now when you go to school and they're giving you tests about standard English, it's gonna be easy to you because you're like, oh, I always just talk this way, so it's not that hard for me. Whereas if you came from any other, if your parents or the people around you spoke in any other sort of dialect, now it's like, oh, now you're dumb for it. Now it's a disadvantage for you. So basically, if you just grow up with standard English, you're kind of gonna have a foot up, and then it's like, oh, standard English just so happens to also be the bar for like getting this job and or like doing well on this job interview and stuff. So I think in that way, the people who grow up speaking standard English, so then basically it's kind of generationally can like stay with the same people. Not always, of course. These can always change, and people can learn and change from where whatever they grew up with. But it's just a disadvantage, right? Okay, I think those are some good points. I want to read some of the things that I started from your post. So I'm just going to kind of go through them. And I know a lot of people might have said sort of similar things, so I just tried to like pick one. Okay, so somebody said here, um, talking about, I think they were talking about liking the way that Vershawn writes here, and they say this new technology generation, as I call it, forces us to learn a new way of writing things. We cut words short, for example, WE for whatever, the famous LOL, we all know stands for laugh out loud, a whole bunch of other words. So yeah, I think that this is a point that goes right along with what he's saying, the way the technological changing of words. And I think we should view it as a good thing. There used to be, we might read an essay about this, but there used to be a lot of people who thought that like when texting like was becoming the big thing back in like the earlier 2000s when I was like in middle school and stuff, in high school, people were like, "Oh, this is going to ruin the language. This will be the death of the English language." And I'm like, I don't know. I think it kind of gave us a bunch of new stuff that is actually really cool. So that's something I want to read. Okay. Oh, here's something good. So someone said here, talking about Vershawn Young's writing style, they said his writing style certainly isn't considered standard English. More like the author has his own language, as Fish would say. So I would make one thing I would disagree with here. It's not that Vershawn Young that dialect is his own language. It's dialect is still spoken by a community, right? Other people have to speak the dialect. You can't literally make up your own language. That's not a dialect. That's like like when you're a kid and you try to make up some secret language so like someone can't understand what you're saying. That's not what a dialect is. A dialect has to be spoken by like a larger community of people, and there still are like some rules to it. Like we can say he's writing in dialect here, but it's like, oh look, he's still using capital letters. Somebody's name, he capitalizes it. He's using periods. He's skipping lines. He has paragraphs. So it's not as if dialect allows us to abandon all rules. Dialects have their own rules that kind of change and fluctuate. They're not hard and fast written in stone. It's not that rigid. The rules can move around, but it has to be the way that other people speak as well, which is kind of the bare minimum for all of this is like that other people understand what you're saying. So that was good. I just wanted to get to that. Okay, here are some things I really appreciated. This someone said here, it's kind of hard for some people, including myself, to express their opinions without grammar being corrected. I really appreciated that because I think that like think about just like I don't know how messed up that is. Just like you're trying to like get your thoughts out there, think about what you think as a person, make yourself heard, communicate with people, and then all that's happening in school a lot of the time is they're just picking apart your grammar. You're trying to like make an argument about like what you think is the right thing, or you're writing about a book or something, your ideas. Like, oh well, you put the comma in the wrong place, you fail. It's just like it seems like disrespectful and just like they're missing the point. It's almost as if they're more concerned with you jumping through hoops and showing that you know the rules than they are with actually reading what you said and like thinking about the ideas. And then what goes along with it, something someone else said here, they said, I do find it annoying that people will be very quick to judge those that speak that way, that speak in any dialect, right? And yeah, I think it's annoying when people do that. I think it's a kind of negative, kind of like trying to assert authority, control your language. You don't even know how to talk. Okay, here's one I like. Someone here said here on the idea of the status quo kind of thing. They said it is somewhat of a form of oppression. For one, suburbs and urban neighborhoods do not get the same quality of education or life, to be exact. So yeah, that's another thing too. Like by the time you're a teenager, the extent to which you are able to speak standard English could also be a reflection of like the school system wherever you grew up. I thought that was an interesting point. This was really good. Somebody said here, also some people get their point across better without using the right way of writing or speaking. I thought that was really good too, because like if what we're trying to do in English classes, right, is be communicate the best we can when we're writing essays. If we're making an argument, when we write an argument essay, which we will do in this class, we're going to be trying to convince the reader. So if you're trying to convince the reader, what's your most effective way of doing that? Is it writing in the pure standard English, or is it more how you speak? I think for pretty much everyone, it's more how you speak. So I think it would be stupid, it'd be silly to let the rules of these things get in the way of convincing our reader when that's our main goal. So I appreciated that. On a similar topic, somebody said here, I also think that you can have so much more passion into your writing something your way than in doing it the right way. I feel like you should just have to get your point across. You trying to do it the right way makes you lose your thoughts instead of just writing the story your way and saying it how you want. I really like the way that this person said that trying to do it the right way makes you lose your thoughts. Because we have the things in our head, right? And students will always tell me, like, oh, I know what I want to say in my head, but then I can't get it down on paper. And I think that is because we've put so many barriers in terms of, the verbs and the conjugation and the commas and the capital and the thing. And then, yeah, we lose our own thoughts and we can't get them on the page. And that's a bad thing to me. I think that it'd be better to remove the barriers, not worry about the rules so much, or worry about it later or something. We'll get back to it at some point. And first, just get your thoughts on the page. So I hope that's something we can try to do in this class. Let me see. I think I had a couple more things I wanted to read. Okay, so here somebody said, I think this person was talking about maybe having spoken another language or something. They said, because I feel as though it is much harder for a person who have spoken one language their whole life to translate what they want to say into another language that was not spoken in their household for too long. Not only that, but I feel as though if academic essays were more accepting of dialect and conversational language, they'd be more interesting to read because they have their own stories to tell. Absolutely, and I think most students agree that this essay is more interesting than most essays they've read. And a lot of that is because of the way that he writes it. I think he makes a good point and he gives good examples and stuff, but the way that it's written, I think, really draws us in and engages us. And I think that's important, I like if you're writing an essay, you want the reader to be interested in your essay and to be engaged with it and really into it. So that's something important for us that I hope we can do in this class. Someone else said, I honestly think it's very difficult to make people read and write perfect English as Fish thinks. Yeah, Fish makes it seem like it's so easy, Oh, we'll just do it this way now. Look, it's so easy. It's like, no, it's not. Like you're like basically like fucking ruining people's lives over this shit. Like it doesn't matter that much, at least in my point of view. Somebody else said, I'm Jamaican and we speak a broken English patois, so I speak patois in writing. Is it wrong if the reader can understand what I'm saying? So again, I like that point that it should be about if the reader can understand it, and that as readers, we should be open to understanding things that we're not used to and to kind of expanding the kinds of writing that we're into. And I think that's good for everyone. And I think I had just one more here and I'll wrap up. I'll try to make some of these other videos shorter. I'm going very long here. I apologize. But I think this essay, I think it rocks. And I think that your posts rocked as well. Okay, so this is again on the idea of the status quo kind of thing. This person said, it's really weird how the people on top get to say that this is the way you have to write, and if you don't, you're considered on the bottom. And again, yeah, I really like how you're thinking about that in terms of who decided this stuff. And realizing like, oh yeah, it just so happens that all the rules benefit you, and you're the one who made them. Wow, I wonder, it's like, what is it? Uno? Did Uno used to have that thing, the card game, where if you got a certain card, it was like, oh, you get to make your own rule, and then it's like a little kid, and they're like, I make the rule that I win every time. And it's like, yeah, that's basically what's going on with the language thing here. Okay, so that's good. I really liked all your responses again. And what I want you to take away from this essay for our class is just that I agree with this essay. I consider this like a manifesto of English composition. I hope that we can try to write in a way that's more comfortable and more natural for us, especially at the beginning of our college careers. I think it's good to try to get in touch with a way of writing where we can get our point across and we can say what we want to say and say in a way that's maybe cool or fun also. But I think it's good to do that. And then, if you need to start writing like a biologist or an accountant or whatever your major is eventually, I think it's good to have this foundation of like, okay, I can write, like me. And then I can start there and then try to be like, okay, now let me try writing like a biologist more so, or whatever your profession is. Because guess what? Each of those fields, every like science, like math, English, whatever, philosophy, each of those fields kind of has their own dialect within that. And a lot of being a student in your major is going to be learning the dialect of whatever your major is. So yeah, I believe this stuff. I take it seriously. We'll talk about grammar at some point because I know you'll have other professors who are going to be assholes about grammar. So we'll talk about it eventually, and I'll try to help you out and stuff. But like, I want us to get our priorities straight when it comes to writing and what makes good writing. I think if we're talking about what is important for a good essay, if we're making a list, grammar, it's not the first thing. It's not really anywhere near the top. It's like maybe, I don't know, the 23rd most important thing for a good essay. I think what's more important is like you guys were saying, getting your point across, what your argument is, making it interesting, how you organize your paper, whether you're convincing the reader, all those kinds of things. All right, so I'll wrap up here. More videos coming soon. I'll see you guys later.